You know those moments. Choosing the easy dinner instead of planning the healthy meal. Or putting off that difficult conversation. Maybe just scrolling through your phone when you know you should be, well, doing something else.
Yeah, definitely. Happens all the time.
These everyday choices, they might seem small, right? But they all tap into something really fundamental about how we're wired, our tendency to focus on the immediate.
And that's really the fascinating core of what we're exploring today. You shared this compelling report that really digs into this, calling it near-mindedness.
Right.
And it's not just about lacking willpower. You know, it's a basic way our brains seem to process information and sort of figure out what matters now.
Exactly. This report, it paints near-mindedness as a really ingrained human pattern. It's like we naturally give so much more weight to what's right in front of us.
The immediate stuff.
Yeah, the instant rewards, the immediate worries. And we tend to undervalue or maybe even just overlook the consequences way down the line. It's like our mental focus has this natural sweet spot for the present.
Precisely. And what the report really drives home is how widespread this tendency is. Wow. It's not just about those personal choices like, what we eat or whether we save up.
No, it seems much bigger.
Yeah, this nearsightedness, it influences pretty much every single part of our lives.
It truly does. The report breaks it down pretty clearly. Our personal struggles with things like debt, our health habits, even issues with addiction. They're all heavily influenced. And then you look at how we approach our careers, how we navigate relationships. It seems this preference for the short term just leaves its mark everywhere.
And the scale, it just keeps going up, doesn't it? The report rightly points out the massive role near-mindedness plays in those big collective challenges we face.
Like what?
Well, think about how we tackle climate change or the way we manage, natural resources.
Yeah.
The ups and downs of our economies, even our repeated sort of difficulties in getting ahead of predictable global threats, like pandemics.
Wow. It's a bit of a wake-up call, isn't it?
It really is.
So our goal in this deep dive is to really, dig into this near-mindedness. We want to understand where it comes from, the cognitive quirks, the behavioral patterns.
Yeah, the mechanics behind it.
Exactly. And maybe even see what insights AI can offer. And crucially, I think we want to figure out why it feels so incredibly hard, so challenging to consistently act in line with what our long-term thinking tells us is probably best.
Right. It's that gap between knowing and doing.
Okay, let's get into this.
All right. So let's maybe start by looking at how different fields approach this idea. Cognitive science, as the report details, largely sees near-mindedness through the lens of cognitive biases.
Right, the mental shortcuts.
Exactly. These are like predictable ways our brains tend to make errors in judgment because they're trying to be efficient.
Shortcuts that can sometimes lead us, down the wrong path, right? The report points out a few that seem particularly relevant here, like confirmation bias, for instance.
Yeah. Classic one.
That's where we tend to grab onto information that already fits with what we think and sort of ignore anything that suggests a long-term risk we'd, frankly, rather not think about.
So our bias confirms our desire to avoid the difficult future stuff.
Yeah. It blinds us to those long-term risks, making the nearsighted choice feel, justified somehow.
Exactly. Then there's the availability heuristic.
Okay, what's that?
That's where we give more weight to information that just pops into our head easily, usually because it's recent or really emotionally charged.
Okay, like seeing a news report about a plane crash makes flying feel riskier, even though statistically.
Exactly. So a really vivid short-term event can totally overshadow a less dramatic, but maybe much more important long-term trend. Our focus gets skewed by what's, loud and recent.
Got it. And anchoring bias, that sounds like getting stuck.
Pretty much. That first piece of information we get about something just sort of sticks. It anchors our judgment.
Even if later info should change our mind.
Yeah, even when we get more data later that should really adjust our long-term view. It's like that initial, maybe short-term data point sets the anchor, and it's surprisingly hard to pull it up and adjust, even when the evidence says we should.
Huh. Okay. And optimism bias. We all think bad things won't happen to us.
Right, that's the one. We tend to underestimate the likelihood of negative stuff happening to us personally, especially in the future.
Which makes us less likely to prepare for it.
Absolutely. It definitely makes us less inclined to plan for those negative long-term possibilities. That feeling of like personal invulnerability makes us downplay future risks and just prioritize immediate comfort or ease.
It's like we have this built-in shield against future worries. Now, the report also brings in this idea of bounded rationality.
Right. Herbert Simon's idea.
Yeah, that's the concept that our thinking isn't perfect, right? It's limited.
Exactly. Limited by how much info we can actually process, the time we have, and just our own, cognitive horsepower.
So we can't always figure out the absolute best long-term option.
Precisely. And what's fascinating here is how that leads to what Simon called satisficing.
Satisficing. Settling for good enough.
Yeah, basically. Settling for a solution that's good enough right now in the short term, rather than pushing for the absolute optimal long-term outcome, which might take way more effort or information.
So near-mindedness could actually be seen as like a somewhat rational response to being overwhelmed?
In a way, yeah, a rational response to our cognitive limits, even if it doesn't serve us well in the long run. It's like our brains are saying, look, this is good enough for now, even if now isn't the best guide for, 10 years from now.
Makes sense. Our brains are trying to conserve energy, even if it means missing the bigger picture sometimes. Okay, so that's cognitive science. Now, behavioral economics, they take a different angle, right? More about how we actually make choices, especially with time involved.
Exactly. And the core concept there, as the report highlights, is temporal discounting.
Temporal. So time-related discounting.
Yeah. The basic idea is the further away a reward is in the future, the less we tend to value it right now in the present.
Okay, so $100 today feels better than $100 in a year.
Definitely. It's like future rewards are on this sliding scale of value, and the value drops off the further out they are. The report then dives into present bias, which is a really, really powerful aspect of this.
Okay. That feeling of, I want it now W, right?
That's it, exactly. The report says it's this extra strong preference for immediate gratification, almost regardless of what we might get if we just waited a bit.
And that explains why we make plans. Like, okay, Monday, I start the diet. But then Monday comes and that cake looks really good.
Right. Your future plan gets totally derailed the second that future becomes the present. Even when we logically plan for the long term, that pull of the immediate can just completely overpower our intentions.
Yeah, and that explains a lot.
It really does. And this present bias, it's a huge driver of things like procrastination, those unhealthy habits we mentioned, and crucially, not saving enough money.
Okay. Then we get to hyperbolic discounting. This sounds more technical.
It is a bit, but the core idea is really key to understanding near-mindedness. It contrasts with what economists might call rational or exponential discounting.
Which is?
Exponential discounting is like a steady, predictable decrease in value over time. Like maybe something loses 10% of its value for every month you have to wait, smooth curve.
Okay, logical.
But hyperbolic discounting shows that the value of a reward drops off really steeply for short delays, but then the rate of decrease slows down for longer delays. It's not a smooth curve, it's much steeper at the beginning.
So that initial drop is huge. That want it now feeling is extra intense for immediate stuff.
Exactly. That initial steep drop is much stronger than the gradual decline we might rationally expect. It really highlights the power of the immediate.
So that explains the example they gave. Like, I might choose $100 right now over $110 tomorrow.
Yep. Classic preference.
But I'd probably wait the extra day if the choice was $100 in 30 days versus $110 in 31 days.
Exactly. That switch in preference, depending on the time frame, that's a hallmark of hyperbolic discounting. The extra day feels like a much smaller deal when it's already way out in the future.
Wow.
The report even gives the math for it, vial dollars A, 1 plus K together. But the key is how that K factor, the discount rate, have a bigger impact over shorter delays D.
Fascinating. Okay, now the report also touches on myopic loss aversion. That sounds like it's specifically about losing money.
Yeah, it comes from behavioral finance. Myopic means short-sighted, right?
Right.
And loss aversion is the idea that we feel the pain of a loss much more strongly than the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
Okay, so losing $100 feels way worse than gaining $100 feels good.
Exactly. So myopic loss aversion is when we focus too much on potential losses in the near future and overreact to them, even if enduring that short-term volatility might lead to much better long-term gains.
So we panic and sell stocks when the market dips slightly, even if history shows it usually recovers.
That's a perfect example. Our immediate fear of loss, combined with that short-term focus, prevents us from making potentially smarter choices for our future financial health.
Makes total sense. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. The report also brings in artificial intelligence. That's a really interesting angle.
It is, isn't it? The report draws this cool analogy to something called limited search depth in AI agents.
Limited search, like they can't look too far ahead.
Exactly. When these AI agents are trying to solve complex problems, like figuring out the best moves in chess or Go, they can't possibly calculate every single future possibility out to the very end.
Right, that would take forever.
So they only consider maybe a few steps ahead. This limited search depth can lead them into what are called local optima.
Local optima, meaning?
Solutions that look really good in the short term, based on their limited look ahead, but they aren't actually the best overall long-term solution. The AI gets stuck on the first good-looking hill it finds without realizing there's a much bigger mountain further away.
Huh. Kind of like humans grabbing the immediate reward and missing out on a much better long-term strategy down the line.
That's the analogy exactly. The report also mentions the exploration versus exploitation trade-off in reinforcement learning AI.
Exploration versus exploitation. Stick with what works or try something new.
Pretty much. AI agents have to constantly decide. Should I stick with the action I know gives a decent immediate reward, exploitation, or should I try out some new, uncertain actions that might lead to a much bigger reward later on, exploration?
That sounds exactly like the human dilemma with near-mindedness. Stick with the familiar, comfortable, immediate thing or risk exploring for a potentially better but uncertain future.
A very similar computational problem.
And the report points out something kind of sobering, that AI models, even those big, large language models, can actually learn and replicate our human biases, including near-mindedness, just from the data we train them on.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. If they're trained on text and data reflecting human short-sightedness, they can pick it up.
Which, ironically, gives us another way to study these biases, right? By seeing them reflected back at us in these artificial systems.
Exactly. It's like holding up a computational mirror to our own minds.
Yeah.
So the report takes all these perspectives, the cognitive science, the behavioral economics, the AI analogies, and synthesizes them into a really comprehensive definition of near-mindedness.
Okay, so boiling it all down, what's the report's core definition?
It basically defines it as this fundamental human tendency, likely, rooted in our evolution and how our brains are wired, to consistently overvalue immediate concerns and rewards compared to future ones.
Driven by all those things we just talked about.
Right.
Huh.
Driven by our cognitive limits, those biases, our emotional responses, the way we discount the future. And importantly, it often leads to decisions that feel okay, maybe even good in the moment, but are actually suboptimal, not great in the long run.
And that affects us as individuals and, as we saw, as whole societies.
Exactly. The report sums it up nicely in that table, showing how each discipline sheds light on it.
Okay, so it's not just about being bad at planning or lacking willpower. It's way deeper than that, baked into how we function.
Seems like it.
So where does this wiring actually come from? The report digs into the origins, starting with evolutionary pressures.
That's right. Think about our ancestors living in environments where survival was often about immediate threats and opportunities.
Right, finding food now, escaping danger now.
Exactly. In that kind of world, a strong focus on the now would have been a huge survival advantage. The report emphasizes that prioritizing immediate needs likely trumped waiting for uncertain future benefits. You know the saying, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably a very, very practical survival strategy back then.
Yeah.
Focusing on the distant future might have gotten you eaten today.
Makes sense. If you're facing down a saber-toothed cat, worrying about your 401k contribution probably isn't the top priority.
Precisely. And temporal discounting, that tendency to devalue future rewards, might have been an adaptive response to the sheer uncertainty of the past.
Or so.
Well, there was simply no guarantee you'd even be around to collect that future reward. Life was precarious. The report points out that natural selection would likely only favor waiting for a delayed reward if it was substantially bigger, not too far off, and crucially, if the odds of actually getting it were reasonably high.
And uncertainty would always lower those odds.
Exactly. So a bias towards the present, towards the sure thing right now, was likely reinforced over generations. That bird in the hand wasn't just a preference, it was a potentially life-saving calculation.
Okay, so this preference for the immediate, which was maybe super helpful, even rational back then, can become a real problem in our modern, complex world where the consequences of our actions can play out over years, decades, even centuries.
That's the core mismatch the report calls adaptive rationality versus modern maladaptation. Our brains are, in some ways, still operating on Stone Age software in a space age world.
It's like our settings haven't been updated for the current environment.
Kind of, yeah. Those mental shortcuts and preferences that once served us well, like a really strong craving for immediate calories when food was scarce,
Right, survival mode.
can now, in an environment of fast food and sugary drinks everywhere, lead directly to problems like obesity and related health issues. The adaptation becomes a maladaptation.
Wow. Okay, so that's the evolutionary backdrop. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty, the neurobiology, what's actually happening inside our brains.
All right. The report talks first about the brain's reward pathway and the role of dopamine.
Dopamine, I always thought that was just the pleasure chemical.
It's a bit more nuanced than that. Dopamine is absolutely crucial for motivation, learning, and especially how we value potential rewards.
How we decide what's worth going after.
Exactly. And the report highlights something interesting. Dopamine neurons don't just signal pleasure, they signal the difference between what we expect to get and what we actually get. It's about prediction error.
Okay. And how does that link to near-mindedness?
Well, there's a strong link between dopamine signaling and temporal discounting. Research shows that the dopamine response to cues signaling a future reward tends to decrease the longer you have to wait for that reward.
So the further away the reward, the less dopamine buzz we get thinking about it now.
Pretty much. That immediate reward triggers a bigger, or at least more immediate, dopamine response, making it feel more appealing, more motivating right now.
Got it. The report also mentions dopamine's role in go and no-go learning. What's that about?
Yeah, dopamine isn't just about saying, go get that reward. It's also involved in learning when not to act, inhibiting impulsive actions, the no-go. It helps us learn from negative consequences, too.
Ah, so it's involved in the brakes as well as the accelerator.
Kind of, yes. And the report notes that when this dopamine system is out of balance, maybe due to certain conditions like ADHD or medications or substance abuse and addiction, it can significantly mess with our temporal decision-making.
How so?
It often leads to increased impulsivity by making us discount the future even more steeply. Addiction is a prime example, the report says, where the immediate reward of the drug just hijacks the system, making long-term consequences seem almost irrelevant in the moment.
Wow. So imbalances in dopamine can literally make the future seem less valuable.
That seems to be a key part of it.
Okay. Now, what about the prefrontal cortex, the PFC? That's supposed to be the brain's CEO, the control center, right?
That's a good analogy. The PFC is absolutely critical for those higher-level executive functions, planning, setting goals, holding information in mind, working memory, making complex decisions, and crucially for this discussion, inhibiting our impulses, that top-down control.
Putting the brakes on those immediate urges.
Exactly. The report even mentions the famous historical case of Phineas Gage.
Oh, yeah, the guy with the railroad spike through his head.
That's the one. He survived, but the damage to his PFC reportedly made him much more impulsive, less reliable, unable to stick to plans. It was like his ability to think ahead and control his immediate reactions was severely impaired.
A stark, literal example of brain damage impacting foresight.
Absolutely. And the report also notes something more relatable: stress. Stress can significantly impair PFC function.
Which probably explains why we tend to make more impulsive, less thought-out decisions when we're really stressed out.
That's a very likely mechanism. When we're stressed, the brain's CEO isn't functioning at its peak, and we're more likely to default to those immediate, maybe less rational responses.
The control center takes a hit and the impulses take over.
Pretty much. The PFC's job is to integrate signals from the reward system, our emotions, our memories, and use all that to guide behavior towards those longer-term goals. Near-mindedness can be seen, at least in part, as a failure of the PFC to effectively exert that control over the more immediate urges bubbling up from other brain regions.
Okay, so dopamine drives the reward seeking. PFC tries to manage it for the long term. What else is involved? The report brings in serotonin. I usually associate that with mood, like depression or anxiety.
It's definitely involved in mood, but serotonin seems to play a really important role in regulating impulsivity, too.
Oh.
It's linked to things like impulse control, patience, and even harm avoidance, being cautious about negative consequences. The report suggests that low serotonin levels, or maybe dysfunction in how the serotonin system works, are associated with increased impulsivity, more risk-taking, and difficulty delaying gratification.
So serotonin might act as sort of a brake on those impulsive, reward-driven behaviors?
That's a good way to think about it. It might help put the brakes on those dopamine-driven impulses, allowing for more consideration of potential downsides or the value of waiting.
And the report mentions studies, like where they temporarily lowered people's serotonin levels?
Yeah, studies using things like acute tryptophan depletion tryptophan is a building block for serotonin. And they found that lowering serotonin could make people act more impulsively or aggressively, especially in social decision-making tasks.
Wow. So it seems like having a balanced level of serotonin helps us pause, maybe consider the longer-term consequences, and resist grabbing the immediate thing.
Exactly. Serotonin might be that crucial counterbalance to the dopamine-driven pursuit of immediate rewards, helping us weigh potential future negative outcomes more effectively.
So it seems like this delicate interplay between dopamine, serotonin, and the executive control of the PFC is really central to navigating these trade-offs between the present and the future.
That seems to be the picture emerging from the neuroscience. Now, the report also explores genetic influences. Is this tendency towards near-mindedness something we're, partly born with?
It definitely looks like there's a genetic component. The report talks about twin studies.
Comparing identical versus fraternal twins.
Yeah. Those studies consistently show significant heritability for impulsivity generally, and specifically for delayed discounting that tendency to devalue future rewards we talked about.
So a good chunk of the variation between people in how patient or impulsive they are comes down to their genes.
Seems like it. The heritability estimates range a bit, sometimes cited as 35–60%, but it suggests a substantial genetic influence on how strongly we're pulled by the present versus the future. Our genetic lottery plays a role.
And this applies to different ways of measuring delayed discounting, right? Both the simpler measures and those more complex hyperbolic models.
Yes, the report mentions it applies across different measurement approaches, and it even discusses delayed discounting being considered an endophenotype.
Okay, endophenotype. What does that mean exactly?
Think of it as like an intermediate measurable trait that's linked to a disorder but is maybe simpler and more directly influenced by genes. It's like a hidden marker.
So not the disorder itself, like addiction or ADHD, but an underlying heritable trait that makes someone more vulnerable to developing that disorder.
Exactly. The report suggests delayed discounting fits this idea for things like addictive disorders and externalizing behaviors like ADHD because it's strongly associated with them. It's heritable, it's relatively stable over time, and it's even found more often in unaffected family members.
Ah, okay. So it's like inheriting a predisposition towards more impulsive, short-sighted decision-making, which then increases the risk for these other conditions.
That's the idea. Now, have they actually pinpointed specific genes involved yet?
Research is definitely ongoing, but the report mentions some findings linking genes involved in, surprise, surprise, dopamine neurotransmission to variations in delayed discounting.
Ties back to the reward system again.
It does. And also, large-scale genetic studies called GWAS are starting to find genetic correlations between delayed discounting and conditions like ADHD, smoking initiation depression, and even things like body mass index, BMI.
Wow. So our genes could be influencing our tendency to discount the future, which in turn connects to all these different health and behavioral outcomes.
It's a complex picture, but the genetic links are becoming clear. The report also notes that delayed discounting might be genetically distinct from other aspects of impulsivity, suggesting it's a specific facet we inherit.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, let's shift gears again and look at the bigger picture, the sort of historical and cultural dimensions of this. Near-mindedness isn't just an individual brain thing, is it?
Absolutely not. It is manifested collectively throughout history, often with pretty dramatic consequences. The report gets into some historical case studies where societal collapse seems linked to short-term thinking, especially around resource management.
The first one that jumped out at me was Easter Island, Rapa Nui.
Ah, yes, the classic cautionary tale.
Yeah, that story about the islanders getting so obsessed with building those giant statues, the moai, that they supposedly cut down all their trees.
Leading to soil erosion, resource scarcity, maybe warfare, and the potential collapse of their civilization.
It's always presented as this stark warning about short-sightedness, right? Focusing on immediate cultural or status goals, maybe competitive statue building, potentially blinding them to the long-term ecological consequences.
It is indeed a powerful story, and it serves as a potent metaphor. Though the report rightly adds a note of caution that ecocide theory, while popular, is actually quite debated among researchers now.
Oh, what, really? What are the other perspectives?
While some argue the islanders were actually quite adaptive and managed resources sustainably for a long time, Others point to factors like the introduction of rats eating tree seeds, or suggest the major collapse happened after European contact due to disease and slave raiding, rather than purely self-inflicted environmental ruin.
Okay, so it's more complex than the simple "they cut down all the trees for statues" narrative.
Definitely more complex. But even with those nuances, the report suggests the Easter Island story still holds metaphorical power as a warning about how focusing intensely on present needs or goals can have unforeseen and potentially devastating future costs, especially regarding environmental limits.
Got it. So maybe not the perfect textbook case of nearsighted collapse, but still a valuable illustration of the potential dangers. The report also mentions other historical examples, right? Like the Maya, the Anasazi in the U.S. Southwest, even the Greenland Norse settlements.
Yes, and others like the Indus Valley or Akkadian Empire. While the specific causes for each are unique and complex, the report links many of these declines or collapses, at least in part, to factors like environmental degradation, deforestation, soil depletion, water mismanagement, and ultimately a failure to adapt to long-term environmental changes or pressures.
It seems like these past societies face their own versions of that conflict between immediate needs, maybe agricultural production, population growth, political stability, and long-term sustainability.
Exactly. These historical examples, even with their complexities, underscore the vulnerability of societies that fail to anticipate or effectively respond to long-term pressures. Perhaps because their focus gets locked onto more immediate political, social, or economic concerns.
Which brings us to the concept the report discusses next. The tragedy of the commons. I remember this from, Econ 101.
Eric Hardin's famous idea, yeah.
The basic idea is that when you have a shared resource, like common grazing land.
Or fisheries, clean air, fresh water.
Right. If everyone acts purely in their own rational short-term self-interest, like putting one more cow on the pasture to maximize their own herd,
then the cumulative effect of everyone doing that can overwhelm and deplete the shared resource, making everyone worse off in the long run.
So individual nearsighted rationality, when scaled up, leads to collective long-term disaster. It's a collective action problem driven by short-term incentives.
Precisely. The report gives plenty of modern examples. Overfishing is a huge one. Think about the collapse of the Grand Banks cod fishery off Canada. What seemed like an inexhaustible resource was decimated because individual fishing fleets, driven by immediate economic needs, collectively took too much.
Wiped out the future of the entire industry by focusing only on the immediate catch.
Exactly. Other examples include deforestation, depletion of water aquifers, air and water pollution, greenhouse gas emissions contributing to climate change, ocean plastic pollution, all situations where individual or corporate short-term gains contribute to long-term collective, often environmental, harm.
It's a really powerful framework for understanding why we struggle with these big environmental issues. The report does mention criticisms of Hardin's original thesis, right?
Yes, it acknowledges criticisms, particularly from scholars like Eleanor Ostrom, who show that communities can and often do successfully manage common pool resources without privatization or top-down government control, under certain conditions involving trust, communication, and shared rules.
So it's not an inevitable tragedy.
Not inevitable, no. But the core insight, how the pursuit of short-term individual gain can conflict with long-term collective well-being when dealing with shared resources, remains incredibly relevant.
Definitely. The report also touches on policy failures driven by short-term thinking, like governments underinvesting in infrastructure or public health preparedness because the costs are immediate, but the benefits or avoided disasters are further down the road.
Exactly. Or economic policies focused on short-term growth or quarterly profits that lead to financial instability or environmental damage later on. We've certainly seen the consequences of kicking the can down the road on those kinds of issues. Those immediate savings or gains can lead to much bigger, costlier problems later.
Seems like a recurring theme. Now, the report moves into something really fascinating. The influence of cultural norms and belief systems on our collective time orientation.
Yeah, this suggests that near-mindedness isn't just universal human wiring. It can also be shaped by the cultures we live in.
It talks about Hofstede's dimensions of culture, specifically long-term versus short-term orientation. What's the difference there?
So cultures scoring high on long-term orientation, LTO, tend to value things like perseverance, thrift, bordering relationships by status, and observing this order, and having a sense of shame traits that support investment in the future.
Okay, focused on the long game.
Right. Whereas cultures scoring high on short-term orientation, STO, tend to emphasize respect for tradition, protecting one's face, personal steadiness and stability, and expecting quick results, more focused on the past and present.
So our cultural upbringing can actually instill different values around time, pushing us towards prioritizing either the distant future or the here and now.
That's the idea. And these cultural orientations can affect everything from national saving rates and investment in education to business strategies and how societies approach long-term challenges like climate change. The Jill Loeb Project's research on future orientation finds similar variations across cultures. It's like different societies operate on different default time horizons.
Makes you wonder how much our own cultural background subtly shapes our individual tendencies towards near-mindedness or foresight.
It's a really interesting question. The report also brings up Max Weber's famous and also controversial work on the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism.
Ah, right. The idea that certain Protestant beliefs somehow fostered capitalism.
Sort of. Weber argued very basically that certain tenets of ascetic Protestantism, particularly Calvinism, things like predestination, the idea of a calling in worldly work, emphasis on frugality and reinvestment rather than consumption, unintentionally created a cultural spirit highly conducive to rational, systematic, long-term economic activity and capital accumulation.
So these specific religious beliefs encouraged a future-oriented, disciplined approach to work and money, contrasting with other orientations that might have been more present-focused or traditional.
That was Weber's argument. It highlights how deeply held belief systems, religious or philosophical, might influence a society's overall orientation towards the future versus the present. Again, it suggests culture plays a role.
Even though Weber's thesis is debated, it's another pointer to how culture matters. The report briefly mentions other philosophical perspectives too, like existentialism versus consequentialism or Confucianism, potentially influencing attitudes towards temporal focus.
Right. Just acknowledging that different worldviews can frame the importance of the past, present, and future differently.
So it really seems like this whole issue of near-mindedness isn't just psychological or biological. It's deeply woven into the fabric of our history, our institutions, and our culture.
Absolutely. It's a multi-layered phenomenon.
Okay, let's dive deeper now into the individual psychology again. Why exactly do we prioritize the present so strongly? We've touched on some biases, but the report goes into more detail on ones that specifically mess up long-term planning.
Right. Beyond those general ones like confirmation or availability bias, there are others that directly sabotage our ability to think ahead effectively. The first one is the planning fallacy.
Oh man, that's my personal specialty. I am always underestimating how long things will take or how much they'll cost, even when I have past experience that should tell me otherwise.
You and pretty much everyone else. It's a remarkably robust bias. We consistently underestimate the time, costs, and risks involved in future tasks, while simultaneously overestimating the potential benefits. It's like we have this ingrained optimism about how smoothly future projects will unfold.
Even when history screams otherwise.
Exactly. It's a major, major hurdle to realistic long-term planning. And it links closely to optimism bias, which we mentioned earlier. In the planning context, optimism bias makes us believe we personally are less likely to experience those negative planning outcomes, the delays, the setbacks, the budget overruns that we might see happening to others.
So that won't happen to my project.
Right. The report even mentions spatial and temporal aspects. We're optimistic about things happening far away or far in the future. It's like we think we're somehow immune to the usual pitfalls when it comes to our own future endeavors.
Wearing those rose-tinted glasses again. The report also mentions normalcy bias. What's that one?
Normalcy bias is the tendency to assume that the future will be pretty much like the present or the recent past. We underestimate the possibility of disaster or unprecedented events simply because they haven't happened recently or to us.
So we get lulled into a false sense of security based on things being okay right now.
Exactly. It makes it hard to prepare for or even believe in the possibility of major disruptions or black swan events, whether it's a pandemic, a financial crisis, or the impacts of climate change. We default to assuming things will just carry on as normal.
That definitely sounds like it contributes to near-mindedness blinding us to potential long-term threats because they feel abnormal.
Precisely. Now, the report revisits Kahneman and Tversky's famous System 1 and System 2 thinking here, and it really helps explain why we often fail to act on long-term logic, even when we kind of know it.
Right. System 1 being the fast, intuitive, automatic, heuristic-driven thinking.
The gut reaction.
And System 2 being the slow, deliberate, effortful, logical thinking.
Exactly. And the point is, our default mode is often System 1. It's quick, it's easy, it conserves mental energy.
So it uses those biases and shortcuts we talked about.
Right. And System 1 often comes up with an answer or an impulse before our slower, more logical System 2 even gets fully engaged, especially if System 2 is tired, distracted, or under cognitive load.
So when we're stressed or rushed or just on autopilot, we're much more likely to go with that quick, easy System 1 impulse, which is often focused on the immediate.
That's the core idea, that immediate appeal, that gut feeling, that quick judgment based on readily available info or a strong emotion. That System 1 response can easily override more thoughtful, long-term evaluation by System 2. Near-minded choices often feel intuitive precisely because they come from System 1.
And it takes effort to engage System 2 and override that initial impulse.
A lot of effort sometimes. The report includes a helpful table summarizing these key biases that stack the deck in favor of near-mindedness. So it's often not that we can't see the long-term logic, it's that these powerful cognitive mechanisms distort it, bypass it, or just make it feel less compelling than the immediate option.
Our brains have these built-in shortcuts that consistently favor the now.
That seems to be a fundamental part of the architecture.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense psychologically. It's like our brains have these default settings that make it hard work to prioritize the long view. Now, the report also dives into emotional influences. It's not just about cold, hard cognition or logic, is it?
Not at all. Emotions play a huge role. One key aspect is how our immediate emotions often carry far more weight in our decisions than our predictions about how we'll feel in the future.
We're bad at predicting our future feelings.
We're often not great at it. Psychologists call it errors in effective forecasting. We might overestimate how happy a future reward will make us, or how bad a future negative event will feel. More importantly, the feelings we have right now, maybe anxiety about a sacrifice or excitement about an immediate pleasure, tend to overpower those abstract predictions of future feelings.
So the immediate discomfort of, say, starting a workout or resisting a craving feels much more real and intense than the predicted distant satisfaction of being healthier or reaching a goal.
Exactly. That present moment feeling often wins out. And the report also emphasizes how stress and negative moods can directly increase our temporal discounting.
Right. We mentioned stress affects the PFC. So when we're feeling down or stressed, we become even more focused on immediate relief for gratification.
That's what the evidence suggests. Stress hormones can impair PFC function, weakening our executive control and making us more prone to impulsive, nearsighted behavior seeking immediate comfort or escape.
So we reach for the comfort food or procrastinate on the stressful task, even more when we're already feeling bad.
It can become a vicious cycle. Interestingly, even some positive emotions, particularly those linked to immediate reward or excitement, can sometimes increase impulsivity, while others like gratitude might promote patience. So it's complex.
Emotions definitely stir the pot. Now, the report introduces something called construal level theory, or CLT. That sounds like another key piece of this psychological puzzle.
It really is. CLT is about how the psychological distance of something, whether it's distant in time, space, social connection, or probability, affects how abstractly or concretely we think about it.
Okay, so distant things are abstract, near things are concrete.
That's the core idea. Things that are psychologically near, like what you're doing this afternoon, we tend to think about in concrete, detailed, specific terms, the how. How will I do it? What are the specific steps?
Right, like I need to go to the store, buy these ingredients, chop the vegetables.
Exactly. But things that are psychologically distant, like your retirement in 30 years or climate change impacts in 2100, we tend to think about in more abstract, high-level, general terms, the why. Why is it important? What are the core values involved?
Okay, so retirement is about financial security, abstract why, not filling out specific forms today, concrete how. Climate change is about protecting the planet, abstract why, not the hassle of recycling this specific bottle, concrete how.
Precisely. And this difference in construal level has huge implications for near-mindedness.
How so?
Well, first, it explains the conflict between value and feasibility. We might value a long-term goal abstractly, the why is compelling. But when it comes time to act now, the concrete feasibility concerns, the hassles, the immediate costs, the how, become much more salient and can override the abstract value.
So the abstract appeal of the future goal gets swamped by the concrete difficulties of present action.
Often, yes. Second, it links to discounting. Those abstract future rewards or consequences just feel less tangible, less real, less emotionally engaging than concrete present ones. which contributes to why we discount their value.
The abstractness makes them feel psychologically further away and less motivating.
Exactly. And third, it helps explain self-control conflicts. The conflict is often between an abstract, high-level, long-term goal, like be healthy, and a concrete, low-level, immediate temptation, like eat this delicious-looking cookie right now. The concrete temptation is often more psychologically compelling in the moment.
Wow. So how we mentally frame things, based purely on their distance in time, fundamentally changes how we value them and whether we act on them.
That's what construal level theory suggests. It provides a powerful lens for understanding why we get drawn to the concrete present and discount the abstract future.
Okay. So putting it all together, the cognitive biases, the bounded rationality, the system 1 versus 2 battle, the emotional influences, the way we construe time, paint a really comprehensive picture of why prioritizing the present feels so natural, almost automatic, even when our rational long-term system 2 knows better.
It really does build a compelling case for why near-mindedness is such a persistent feature of human psychology.
All right, now that we had a better grasp on the psychology and origins, let's turn to the real-world impact. What are the actual consequences of all this near-mindedness, both for us as individuals and for society as a whole?
The report lays out a pretty sobering list of consequences, starting at the individual level. Financially, we've touched on this. Near-mindedness clearly contributes to things like undersaving for retirement, accumulating high-interest debt, making impulsive spending choices, and poor investment decisions driven by short-term market swings or fear.
Yeah, the lure of immediate spending versus the abstract goal of future security, it clearly puts future financial well-being at risk.
Absolutely. Then there are the health and lifestyle consequences, which are huge. Poor diet choices, lack of exercise, smoking, substance abuse, even things like not adhering to medical treatments for chronic conditions.
All involve choosing immediate gratification or avoiding immediate discomfort over long-term health and well-being. That immediate slice of cake or skipping the gym today feels better now than the distant benefit of better health.
Exactly. The immediate reward or relief overrides the long-term cost. And it extends into our careers and education too. Procrastination on important projects or studying.
Guilty.
Underinvesting time or money in developing new skills that would pay off later. Making impulsive job changes without thinking through the long-term implications.
Yeah, I can see that. Chasing a slightly higher salary now instead of focusing on long-term career growth or satisfaction.
Right. Even our relationships can suffer. Prioritizing winning an immediate argument over maintaining long-term harmony, engaging in impulsive behaviors that damage trust, or simply neglecting the consistent effort required to maintain strong relationships over time.
Ouch. That hits close to home, too. Focusing on the immediate irritation instead of the long-term connection.
And finally, the report notes the impact on our overall mental well-being. Chronic, nearsighted behavior can lead to significant regret, anxiety about the future, and a persistent lack of fulfillment if we consistently fail to pursue those more meaningful long-term goals in favor of fleeting pleasures.
So this constant focus on the short term can really limit our potential, our health, our wealth, our relationships, and ultimately our happiness across many areas of life.
That seems to be the individual level picture, yes. It paints a pretty clear picture of how this short-term focus can really derail our lives if we're not mindful of it.
Okay. Now, what about the bigger picture? The societal consequences. That's where it gets even more concerning, doesn't it?
It really does. The collective impact of widespread near-mindedness contributes significantly, the report argues, to some of the most daunting challenges we face as a global society. Environmental degradation is a prime example.
Climate change being the elephant in the room.
Absolutely. Our collective difficulty in taking decisive, meaningful action on climate change, despite decades of scientific warnings, is a textbook case of near-mindedness at scale. The immediate costs of transitioning away from fossil fuels, changing consumption patterns, investing in new technologies, these feel very concrete and painful now.
While the worst consequences of climate change, though potentially catastrophic, still feel somewhat distant or abstract to many people, especially those not yet directly impacted.
Exactly. So the immediate costs often outweigh the perceived distant benefits in the political and economic calculus, leading to inaction or insufficient action. The same applies to biodiversity loss, resource depletion like overfishing or deforestation. The short-term economic gains often take precedence over long-term ecological stability.
It's like we're collectively struggling to prioritize the long-term health of the planet we depend on.
That's a good way to put it. Then there's economic instability. The report points to things like financial crises often being fueled by excessive short-term risk-taking.
Like the 2008 crisis.
That's often cited as an example, yes. Also, accumulating large amounts of national debt by prioritizing current spending or tax cuts over long-term fiscal stability. And chronic underinvestment in public goods like infrastructure, education, or basic research, because the payoffs are long-term while the costs are immediate.
So a collective short-term focus in economics can lead to systemic vulnerabilities, boom and bust cycles, and missed opportunities for sustainable growth.
Precisely. And public health challenges, too. Think about our often inadequate preparation for pandemics, despite knowing they are a recurring threat. Investing in preparedness costs money now, while the benefit only comes when or if the disaster strikes.
So we underinvest until it's too late.
It often seems that way. And the rising burden of chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease is heavily linked to those individual nearsighted lifestyle choices we talked about, creating huge long-term costs for healthcare systems.
Right. And the report mentions political short-termism as well.
Yeah, this is a big one. The structure of democratic politics, with relatively short electoral cycles, often incentivizes politicians to focus on policies that deliver visible benefits before the next election, rather than tackling complex long-term problems that might require unpopular short-term sacrifices.
Catering to immediate public opinion or powerful lobby groups with short-term interests, instead of long-term national or global well-being.
It creates a system that can actively discourage long-term thinking and reward nearsightedness.
It feels like we're constantly kicking the can down the road on so many critical, long-view issues because of these short-term pressures.
That's a very common feeling. The report even mentions technological risks, the potential for unforeseen negative consequences from rapidly developed technologies, perhaps driven by intense short-term competitive pressures without fully considering the long-term societal or ethical implications.
Like with AR itself, maybe, or genetic engineering, rushing ahead without thinking through all the possibilities.
That's certainly a concern raised. Our drive for immediate innovation and market advantage might come with long-term risks we haven't adequately assessed or prepared for.
Okay. And perhaps the most profound societal impact the report discusses is on future generations, the whole issue of intergenerational effects.
Yes. This is where the ethical dimension really comes to the fore. Our nearsighted actions today, whether it's polluting the environment, accumulating massive debt, letting infrastructure crumble, or failing to address climate change, are effectively passing on costs, risks, and degraded resources to those who come after us.
We're limiting their opportunities and potentially their quality of life because of our focus on our own immediate needs and desires.
That's the crux of the intergenerational justice issue. Our collective short-term focus has direct, tangible impacts on the well-being of future people who have no say in the decisions we make today.
Wow. So putting it all together, this tendency to prioritize the present isn't just a personal failing or an economic deficiency. It has really significant, often deeply negative repercussions that ripple through our individual lives, the stability of our societies, the health of our planet, and even the prospects of generations yet to come.
That's the stark picture the report paints, yes. It underscores why understanding and addressing near-mindedness is so critically important.
Okay. This feels like a good place to maybe start talking about solutions, because the report doesn't just diagnose the problem, right? It also explores potential ways to mitigate near-mindedness and cultivate more foresight.
Absolutely. It spends a good amount of time on mitigation strategies, looking at both the individual and the societal or institutional levels.
Great. Let's start with individuals. What can we do to fight our own near-minded tendencies?
One powerful category the report discusses is using pre-commitment devices.
Pre-commitment,
Yeah.
like locking yourself into something.
Exactly. It's about making a decision now that makes it harder or impossible for your future, more impulsive self to back out of a long-term goal.
Okay, give me some examples.
Well, setting up automatic savings transfers from your paycheck is a classic one. You commit now to saving, and the money is gone before your present self can spend it.
Right, takes willpower out of the equation each month.
Exactly. Other examples could be buying a non-refundable gym membership, publicly announcing a goal to create social pressure, using website blockers like Freedom to avoid distraction, or even timed lock boxes for things like snacks or game controllers.
So you're basically changing the choice architecture for your future self, making the long-term option easier or the short-term temptation harder.
That's the mechanism. You're binding your future hands in a way to protect yourself from your own anticipated impulsivity.
Clever. What else? The report mentions enhancing future self-continuity. What does that mean?
This is about making that future version of yourself feel more real, more connected to your present self. Research suggests the less connected we feel to our future self, the more we discount their well-being.
So if future me feels like a stranger, I don't care as much about saving for their retirement.
Kind of, yeah.
Mm.
So strategies aim to bridge that gap. Things like vividly imagining your future self, writing letters to your future self, or even looking at age-progressed images of yourself have been shown to reduce delayed discounting and increase future-oriented behavior like saving.
Wow, so making that future self feel more psychologically present makes us prioritize their well-being more.
That seems to be the effect. It makes the future consequences feel more personal and less abstract.
Cool. What other individual strategies?
Adopting a more abstract mindset, linking back to construal level theory, focusing on the why behind your long-term goals, the core values they represent, rather than getting bogged down in the concrete how or immediate difficulties.
Reminding yourself of the bigger picture.
Right. Also, simply reducing exposure to temptations out of sight, out of mind to some extent. If the cookies aren't in the house, you can't impulsively eat them.
Good old environmental control.
And practices like mindfulness and emotional regulation techniques can help us become more aware of our impulses and develop the capacity to pause and choose a more considered response rather than reacting automatically.
Building that system 2 muscle.
Exactly. Other practical tips include breaking down large, daunting long-term goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
Makes it feel less overwhelming.
Using reminders, calendars, and planning tools to keep future tasks salient. And, as you mentioned earlier, seeking social support, having friends, family, or groups who encourage and hold you accountable for your long-term goals.
So it sounds like there's quite a toolkit of individual strategies we can use, from clever commitment tricks to mindset shifts to practical planning aids and social backup.
Yes, definitely things individuals can actively do. Now, what about at the societal or institutional level? How can we design systems that encourage more long-term thinking?
That seems crucial given the scale of the problems near-mindedness causes.
Absolutely. One powerful approach the report discusses is using nudges based on behavioral economics insights. This involves structuring choices so that the long-term beneficial option is the default, leveraging our tendency to stick with the status quo bias, and our present bias.
Like the automatic enrollment in retirement savings plans you mentioned, you're in unless you actively opt out.
Exactly. That's been hugely successful in increasing savings rates. Other examples include making organ donation the default, presumed consent, or defaulting people into green energy plans unless they choose otherwise. It gently steers behavior in a beneficial direction without restricting choice.
Using our own biases to help us overcome near-mindedness. Very clever.
It is. Another major strategy is creating institutions specifically designed to advocate for the future.
Like what kind of institutions?
Things like parliamentary committees for the future, independent fiscal councils to assess long-term budget impacts, dedicated ombudspersons for future generations, or specialized agencies focused on long-term risks like climate change.
So building formal counterweights within the system to offset the inherent short-term pressures.
That's the idea, giving the future a louder voice in present-day decision-making. Related to this is trying to lengthen political time horizons.
How could that work?
Suggestions include things like longer electoral terms for politicians, better aligning budget cycles with long-term planning needs, or establishing independent bodies for long-range planning that are somewhat insulated from immediate political pressures.
Trying to reduce that mismatch between short election cycles and long-term problems.
Exactly. Improving foresight and risk assessment capabilities within government and other organizations is also key. Using tools like systematic forecasting, scenario planning, horizon scanning to better anticipate future challenges and opportunities.
Getting better at looking ahead, basically.
Yes. And then there are economic policies designed to internalize long-term costs. Carbon pricing is a prime example.
Making polluters pay for the future damage caused by their emissions now.
Right. By putting a price on carbon emissions today, it makes the long-term negative externality visible and costly in the present, encouraging businesses and individuals to reduce emissions. Similar Pigouvian taxes can be used for other negative externalities. It aligns short-term incentives with long-term goals.
Makes the future cost feel immediate.
That's the logic. Education and communication are also vital, raising public awareness about long-term issues and the consequences of near-mindedness, and finding ways to communicate these often complex issues with emotional resonance, not just dry facts.
Connecting to people's values and future selves, perhaps?
Maybe so. The report also touches on promoting long-term corporate governance structures, moving beyond just quarterly reporting and using regulation to mitigate systemic risks in finance or technology that arise from short-term thinking.
Okay, so it's really a multi-pronged approach at the societal level, too. Nudges, institutions, political reforms, economic tools, better foresight, communication, regulation.
Yes, it suggests we need to tackle it from many angles, addressing both individual psychology and the broader structures and incentives within our societies.
Makes sense. The report even briefly mentions the potential role of technology in helping with mitigation.
Yeah, it acknowledges technology can be a double-edged sword. Things like social media might increase near-mindedness.
Definitely feels that way sometimes.
But technology can also offer tools for mitigation. Things like decision support apps that help visualize future consequences, personalized nudges delivered via smartphones, data visualization tools to make long-term trends more tangible and understandable.
And maybe AI assistance, which connects to the next section.
Exactly. The report then sort of synthesizes the logic behind these mitigation strategies, how they all, in different ways, try to alter the relative perceived value of present versus future options, either by making the future more salient, making the present temptation less appealing, or automating the long-term choice.
Shifting that balance we talked about earlier.
Right. Now let's delve into that final, really forward-thinking piece. The potential role of artificial intelligence in actively addressing near-mindedness.
This feels like it could be a potential game changer, but maybe also a bit scary.
Both, potentially. The report outlines several ways AI could help. First, AI for simply understanding and modeling near-mindedness better.
How would that work?
By using computational modeling to create sophisticated simulations of human decision-making, including our biases. Or by analyzing massive data sets of human behavior, online activity, financial transactions, health records, with privacy safeguards, of course, to identify patterns of near-minded choices and their predictors.
So AI could help us see our own collective tendencies more clearly.
Potentially, yes. Even analyzing language using large language models could reveal cultural attitudes towards time or how near-minded thinking manifests in communication. And as we mentioned, studying how AI systems themselves might learn or exhibit biases can provide further insights into the mechanisms of human bias.
Okay, so AI as a research tool. What about prediction?
The report discusses AI's potential for prediction and early warning. At the individual level, AI might be able to predict who is at higher risk for negative outcomes linked to near-mindedness, like falling into debt, developing addiction, or dropping out of school.
That raises some ethical flags, though, doesn't it?
Profiling people.
Absolutely huge ethical concerns there, which the report acknowledges. Privacy, fairness, potential for discrimination all need careful consideration. But the potential exists for early identification and targeted support.
Okay. And at the societal level, AI could potentially improve our ability to forecast large-scale trends related to near-mindedness, modeling climate change impacts more accurately, predicting resource depletion hotspots, forecasting economic instability, or even giving earlier warnings about pandemic potential by analyzing global data streams.
Giving us a crucial head start in addressing those long-term risks if we choose to act on the warnings.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
Though again, we need to be wary of AI inheriting our own biases in its predictions.
Right. Now, the most exciting part seems to be AI as a direct tool for mitigation and support, helping us be less near-minded.
Exactly. This is where it gets really interesting. The report envisions personalized AI assistants or coaches.
Like a little foresight buddy on your phone.
Kind of. Imagine an AI that helps you set long-term goals, provides timely reminders and personalized nudges based on your known patterns, maybe even detects when you're about to make an impulsive decision based on your behavior and prompts you to reconsider.
Are you sure you want to buy that? Remember your savings goal.
Something like that. Or even using AI to help you practice debiasing techniques tailored to your specific cognitive traps. And imagine AI simulating the future consequences of your choices, maybe using VR or AR, to make those long-term impacts feel much more real and immediate.
Wow, visualizing the future impact of eating badly or not saving, that could be powerful.
It could also facilitate those pre-commitment strategies we talked about, helping you set them up and stick to them. So AI could act as a personalized guide, augmenting your own self-control and foresight.
That sounds potentially amazing. And what about for professionals or policymakers dealing with those big societal issues?
AI could be a powerful decision support tool there too, helping analyze incredibly complex long-term problems with many interacting variables, running through countless what-if scenarios much faster than humans could, identifying potential unintended consequences of policies.
Helping them see beyond the immediate effects.
Right. Optimizing resource allocation for long-term benefit, maybe even helping design better nudges or policies by simulating their likely impact. And AI, especially LLMs, could also help improve education and communication around these complex long-term issues, making them more accessible and understandable.
So it's like AI could help us see further and maybe even have more confidence in the future, as the report puts it. How?
By helping us overcome some of our inherent cognitive limitations, processing vastly more information, applying logic more consistently, in theory, helping to quantify uncertainty more accurately, and, as we discussed, making the abstract future feel more salient and tangible through simulation and visualization. It could augment our own limited foresight capabilities.
That's a compelling vision. But the report adds caveats, right? It's not all rosy.
Definitely not. The report rightly emphasizes the significant caveats and ethical considerations. We've already mentioned the risk of AI inheriting and even amplifying human biases.
Garbage in, garbage out, potentially worse.
Right. There's the risk of over-reliance on AI, leading to de-skilling of our own judgment. The potential for manipulation using AI nudges for commercial or political gain rather than genuine well-being. Huge privacy concerns with the data needed to personalize these systems.
And the black box problem, not always understanding why an AI makes a certain recommendation.
Exactly. And the fundamental challenge of value alignment, ensuring the AI's goals are truly aligned with human, long-term flourishing and ethical principles, which is a massive ongoing research area.
So AI offers powerful potential as a tool to combat near-mindedness, but it's one we need to develop and deploy incredibly carefully, thoughtfully, and ethically.
That's the crucial takeaway. It's not a magic bullet, and it comes with its own significant set of challenges and risks that need proactive attention and governance.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this all up. We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. I think this deep dive into near-mindedness has shown it to be this incredibly deep-seated, almost primal human tendency, but maybe not an insurmountable one.
Right, it has these far-reaching consequences, from our personal lives right up to global challenges.
And understanding its origins, the evolutionary pressures, the brain mechanisms, the cognitive biases, the cultural influences, that really feels like the crucial first step towards addressing it.
Yeah, you can't fix a problem until you really understand it.
Exactly. And by recognizing these patterns, both in ourselves and in the systems around us, and by actively using some of those mitigation strategies we discussed, whether they're individual techniques, societal nudges, institutional reforms,
And maybe cautiously leveraging technology like AI.
we can actively work towards cultivating greater foresight, towards bridging that gap between our immediate impulses and our long-term aspirations.
The challenge, as the report really lays out so clearly, is closing that gap between present actions and future consequences. It feels like the central challenge for a sustainable and, flourishing future.
It really does feel like an imperative of foresight, as the report might put it.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. As you go about your day today or this week, perhaps take a moment to notice your own near-minded tendencies. Where do they show up?
Yeah, are there areas of health, finance, work, relationships, maybe even how you think about bigger world issues where a little more long-term vision could make a difference?
And maybe, just maybe, consider trying out one of those mitigation strategies we talked about, even a small step towards strengthening that foresight muscle.
And if you're curious to dig deeper, maybe reflect on those follow-up questions the report implicitly raises. Which specific biases do you see playing out most strongly in your own life? What are the real-world consequences of nearsightedness, individual or societal, that resonate most with you right now? And how do you feel about the potential and the pitfalls of using technology like AI to help us think more long-term? Lots to chew on.
Definitely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating and slightly troubling world of near-mindedness.
This is DigitView.